Welcome back to Everyday a Miracle Book Club, virtual book club. I don't know what we
Yes.
officially call this thing, but
Yes. Chapter 8. Chapter 8
the
discussion
important thing
time.
today is, Morgan, we're back. You and I are
We're back.
back. We're back.
We needed you guys.
Better
You
than
did.
ever. The team held it down last week, though. I enjoyed their insight. It was good. Did they take any of my notes? Nope. But they did a great job.
What notes did you give them? What did they not apply?
Honestly, truth be told, I didn't give them any notes. So
You imagined the notes.
I did.
Shooter Zach. Number
I was
one
like,
Some
what
troll
are my
here.
notes? I would like notes.
Yeah.
Zach, we felt like, oh, that's cool. This was you're flying these comments, huh? This
That's
is
right,
very
baby.
cool. Sorry,
I
I'm
love
breaking
it.
the fourth wall right now, but very, very cool how you could do that.
I love it. But yeah, it is good to be back.
Cool.
I'm Fredo. We're joined by Morgan. And then also, we got a special guest today,
Howdy.
Zachary Daiquiri, the Applegate.
Is that my nickname?
It is, yeah. That just came to me
That's
right
my
now.
first
But
question is how many nicknames do you have, Zach? Maybe
Me?
that's the starting point of getting to know you.
For sure, Scott has more than I do.
Okay,
I feel like
fair.
I only have a couple. It's like Zach Attack, Zachary. Yeah,
Zapplegate.
that's a good one. Yeah, I'm down with that.
Okay, for those of you that are getting to know Zach right now, his like barometer of like his spectrum of reaction is very different than mine, for example, or Fredo's. Like if he
Pretty
likes something,
low-key.
he'd be like, yeah, that's pretty cool.
Mhm.
If I like something, I'm like, oh my gosh, or Fredo's like singing a song about it. Like Zach's just like, oh, nice.
yeah.
That's a
Cool.
Like that's like A plus. Oh, very cool.
My default response is right on. Yeah.
Right on.
Is that what you
Zach,
said today when I
oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, what was your reaction when you tried the blue milk today? Was it right on?
Right on. Yeah.
Man.
I'm down with the blue milk.
All right. I brought in blue
Wow.
milk today for the office in honor of May the 4th, which is coming up this week. If you haven't already, be prepared. It's a Star Wars day, an important day. Not on the church calendar, but maybe it could be one day. But anyways, I brought him. Yeah.
Well, he's
I brought in
really
some blue
searching
milk.
for something to celebrate because of how the Lakers are doing. So he's got to really like reach. Like,
There it is. There it is.
I had to shoot my shot,
No pun intended.
Zach, thank
Fredo,
you for that.
Any
Thank
words?
you.
Any comments?
I'm good. I'm refraining.
Goes radio silent. Because we know once we start, it's going to be hard to stop.
Yeah.
Yeah. As I discovered
as a
today,
fan,
actually. Hey, my question, Zach, before we introduce like what you do at Sandals, is you're a big emoji user.
Oh yeah.
What could you tell us your favorite emoji? Like what emoji describes right on to you? I think I know, but I'm curious like if I'm receiving what you send out in emails.
Yeah, it's like I think technically it's the relaxed face, but it's kind of like a to me it looks like kind of like an easy smile. She's just kind of like, yeah, that's great.
I thought for sure you were gonna say like the pound it sign.
Oh, that one's also. I'm trying to look up what my top used are. Okay, top 5, based on Slack. Rolling on floor laughing. High five, which I use as the prayer emoji. Thumbs up. The 2 eyes looking and the money bag. So those
the
are my
money
top 5.
bag.
Wow.
Okay.
Get in the bag.
That says a lot about a person. Their top 5 used emojis.
I'm being judged by my emoji use now.
We could deep dive that just on the whole book club.
Honestly, starting with the first one, I don't know if I've ever seen you rolling on the floor laughing.
Internally, it's an internal response, Fredo.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, man, it is great to have you.
Pad of defense. Go ahead, Fredo. Sorry, we got to move. You're good.
It's good. Yeah, we got to keep it moving. Or we could just roast Zach for 35 minutes. But it is Zach. It is great to have you on the podcast or YouTube Live, whatever we're doing today. It's good to have you with us as we dive into chapter 8 of Everyday a Miracle, discovering God's will for your miracle. Just a rich chapter. Pastor Matt opens up with a story about a couple and the journey they went through in childbirth and what they had been waiting for and praying for. And then he gets into Matthew chapter 8 and this encounter with the leper, and just gives some great insight in terms of what might God be actually doing in the process of us asking for a miracle and waiting for a miracle.
Yeah.
And so I'd just love to hear from you. Anything that kind of stood out to you from this chapter that you thought has been immensely helpful, maybe even something just from your own life and experience that you resonated with.
Yeah, I think the one of the things that resonated with me is kind of like, he asked the question at the end, like, why do you think it's so hard to know God's will when it comes to miracles? And I think for me, at least, I don't know, I just feel like life is just so fast. It's just like I'm moving and like God is in the rearview mirror.
Mhm.
And so I think for me, at least, it's just hard to find those moments when I can actually listen to God and hear what he's saying. Like I have to be really intentional about like building those in, thinking about that,
Yeah.
giving it some time. I'm not like, if you've worked with me for any period of time, you know that I'm not kind of like a necessarily like an on the spot person. Like I usually need to like marinate on things a bit.
Mhm.
I need to think
Mhm.
about things a bit. And that's when kind of like my best work, my best thinking, my best direction comes from. Um, and so I would say that's one of the things that stuck out to me. It's like often I think sometimes for me, like even though I work at a church, it's like God's work and movement and direction in my life is like kind of like in the, it's in the passenger seat.
Yeah,
I think it's hard to listen to God, hear from him, and really like find those times when I can hear his kind of like still small voice.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that.
Almost like if we don't like seek it, it won't just happen because he's not forceful. Like, and to ask for a miracle requires us to seek him in the first place. Like,
Yeah.
just to tag on to that, I thought it was really interesting. Like, I'm looking at page 143. I mean, he did this throughout the chapter, but he sums it up in on page 143 where he's literally gives like it's not a step-by-step formula of how to get your miracle. It's definitely much
Hmm.
more nuanced than that. But this idea of like the progression of what it looks like to ask for a miracle, like do that, like trust in what he can do, ask God for what you want him to do, maintain a posture of reverence, listen for the voice of Jesus, and surrender to whatever he has for you. Like, I thought that was just such a cool, succinct way to put it and to remember, like, there's reminders in that and there's actions in that. Like there's reminders of posture and there's also
Yeah.
action in our part of that. Um, yeah, I thought that was a really that was something that just resonated with me. It was like a new idea to think of it in that way.
Hmm.
Yeah, I noticed when I saw that like kind of list, it was almost him kind of going back and just refreshing everyone what he had walked through in the chapter.
Yep.
And for me, those bullet points they seem to get progressively harder, at least as I think about it.
Yeah.
Totally.
Especially the third one, just on maintaining a posture of reverence, because I
Yeah.
think what I find challenging is there is great permission to ask and to plead
Mm.
and just to beg of God for what you want Him to do,
Mhm.
but to not do so in a way in which we are demanding of someone as if like they now owe us,
Mm.
or if
Mm.
it's just purely a transactional relationship in which I've paid the correct amount. Now I need what I've paid for,
Yeah.
and so
Mm.
I think in my own life there is a difficulty and maybe even just a place of growth in which reverence is continually required
Mm.
in prayer and in just understanding this massive, majestic God who has the power to do something, but doesn't always operate on my timetable.
Yeah.
Still requires me to be open and reverent,
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
how about for you guys? What does that look like? Have you thought about that, Morgan, and just maybe your own journey?
I haven't. When I was reading that part specifically, I was actually struck by like when I first was. I kind of grew up going in and out of church a little bit. I wasn't like your typical like, or not typical, but like think of my husband. Maybe that's why I said typical, but he was like the star, like youth group kind of guy, and that wasn't me. And I think that I formed some ideas on things that I liked and disliked
Hmm.
that were part of the church experience, being like kind of in it, kind of out of it. Like one thing that I was thinking through when I was reading this particular section was like when he talked about when pastors say like, you know, every eye bow, every head bowed, all the eyes closed, or whatever version of that. And I don't like being, in general, I don't love being told what to do. And like I remember like being in church just being like why do you have to like prescribe
Hmm.
that, and like
Mm,
sort of like like force this moment or something like that. And I think that over time, like that idea has become um like that's how I see reverence at play. It's not this idea of like the pastors aren't saying that so that you just do what they say, and they're not saying it because God only works if our eyes are closed. Like that's not the reason. It's actually like a physical signaling for us to express reverence to God,
right.
Hmm.
and
Right.
a way for us to adopt that humble posture. So for me, that was, as I was reading that particular section, that was just kind of like a thought that had formed in me, was how I experienced that specific action myself and how I interpreted it versus how it's how I see it now, how that's changed over time.
Hmm.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Zach,
Yeah, I
how
mean,
about for you?
you were talking, Fredo, about how maybe it was Morgan, how like God isn't like, he's not gonna like force you, you know, to
Mm-hmm.
like maybe do anything. And that I've been ruminating. I had a discussion this morning with a person, and he said something to the effect of, you know what, I really feel like right now God is challenging me to like do this thing that we were talking about. He's like, I don't feel like he's forcing me to do it, but I feel like the challenge has been presented. And I was like, wow,
Mm-hmm.
like that is a really great kind of like landing point to come to, where you feel like you're in a place where God's being like, hey, like I have this thing for you. It's right here.
Yeah.
You can take it if you want it, but I'm not going to make you do it.
Mm-hmm.
Is yeah, I think a powerful place to be.
Yeah. That's so good. That's good. I do like to, when you think about maybe someone who's in the hospital and they're waiting to hear the news on whatever the diagnosis is. And as the doctor comes in, there's like this kind of buildup and anticipation. And I just was thinking about how there is a positional reverence there. Like you get
Mm,
quiet, you listen, you're open
Yeah.
to what they have to say. Like every word
Yeah.
of theirs is meaningful, and you have follow up questions, and so I wonder if having that same kind of attitude of like in prayer,
Yeah.
there's a desire to hear from, there's an accepting of the challenge, as you mentioned, Zach. Like I'm willing to,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
be honest about what is presented in front of me, because
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes the diagnosis comes with some kind of challenge, right? You will be
Mm,
required to undergo this or start this
Yeah.
procedure or do this for the next year, and so it's is are yeah, but just are we humble enough to maybe take the position of the recipient and know that we need to do this next thing, so
yeah.
Yeah.
I thought on that same page 145, there's like this little kind of call out that I thought was powerful, and it says all healing miracles are simply an extension of life and a new mission for life.
mm,
And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Fredo, like that, I think that's powerful. It's like, hey, like there is an opportunity for healing, for a miracle, but that also represents like new life and a new
Mm-hmm.
challenge. Like if you maybe pass that by and not let it change you, maybe you're not taking the full advantage or like the full opportunity in that, in that, yeah, of that miracle.
yeah,
It's interesting too, because I feel like when people think of like, I'm begging God for a miracle, the inclination, I don't think for most, is to go like, I'm going to ask for this, but how does he want to change me? It's just like,
Hmm.
how is he going to answer me? Like, what is he going to
Yeah.
do? How is he going
yeah,
to move? Like, what will be the result of this ask that I have? Not like, how will he change me in the process, And like, I wonder if we would be even a little bit more like hesitant to ask if we knew that that would require surrender. But
Hmm.
also then if we embrace the surrender, like the beauty on the other side of both the answer and the change that happens within us, like that, I thought that concept, he explained that so well. Like there was like this one phrase that just stood out to me, like, as you seek God's will, you also have a mission. Like, and that mission
mhm,
might be different than what you set out in the first place when you asked for the miracle. Considering that he might use the storm to give you a new assignment was another way that he put it. And I was like,
Hmm.
that's it. that's a bit bigger than I think of it being. Like it's more
Right.
all encompassing. It's not just a one way street, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because certainly whatever he does decide to do is not disconnected from the rest of our life and what he's called
Mhm.
us to, and
Yeah.
so there is,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that component. And Matt, even as he was working through Matthew 8, had talked about Jesus saying to the man who he healed, "Go and tell no one," which is probably like not the mission he would have thought he had after,
Doesn't
And then
seem like
as
a
I was
mission
reading that,
really.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as I was reading that, I'm like, man, how do you actually go about doing that? Here, your life is now
Mhm.
physically completely changed,
Mm.
Yeah.
and now you're being asked by the Lord to not do something that maybe you would have been excited to do, or planning to
Yeah.
do, and so,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and that
Mm.
was, yeah, personally probably one of the more challenging sections of this chapter for me to work through was just that reality of surrender, being
Mhm.
open and surrendering to whatever God does have for you in the process of this, whether you receive the miracle you've been asking for or you don't. I think surrender is just a difficult thing
Yeah.
to embrace and open up to. So
Yeah.
Yeah. This is
We
a
have
good question from Scott.
Mhm.
yeah,
You just flew it on here, but when I see God's answers, when I see God, Scott typo, when I see God answer others people's miracle. Also, I know him. It's okay. He won't be upset. I won't make fun of other typos. When I see God answer other people's miracles, but not answer my own, how do I not take it personally? That's interesting.
yeah, Zach, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's
Yeah, Zach.
hard. Um, and I think this is one of the reasons why maybe it's like there are a lot of good things around social media, but I also think there's like the shadow side of social media because
Mm,
it's such like a comparison game. And it's like one of the reasons why it's like fun to maybe like watch the lives of like your friends or your family, but at least for me, it's really hard not to play the comparison game. Be like, whoa,
mhm,
wow, that trip looks cool. Oh
mm,
man, that car is pretty sick. Like, oh, that person's life seems like they really have it all together.
mm,
Um, and so, yeah, I think that for me, at least personally, those are some challenges, especially when you're seeing maybe good things happen to people around you. And you're like, man, like, why isn't the thing that I'm praying for or
mm,
I'm dealing with? It's like my wife and I, we dealt with infertility for like 5 years, almost 5 years. And that was
mm,
such a hard season where like, it was just like, okay, shut down all social media. Like, I just don't want to
Mm,
see, I love family. I love people's kids, but it was just so hard to see that stuff when that's what we were struggling with. Um,
mm,
and I think that's a good reminder that it's like, yeah, if you're not thinking about how you're rooting your identity in Christ, then your identity is always going to be in something else. And
mm.
that is what's going to be what you're looking at to compare how your life is going, whether it's going good or going bad. Um, and so, yeah, I think it's hard not to take it personally. I think for me, it comes back to identity and being careful with like what you're putting in, if you're
Mm.
expecting something else to come out of it.
Yeah.
yeah,
Even hearing you speak to that, Zach, even the idea of like the caution that you guys used, the sort of barriers that you created for yourself to prevent more of that from happening, to stop yourself from going there. I think that we have some control and some control in the barriers that we set up for ourselves to maybe not step into that as much, though we might naturally struggle, but that proactive approach I think is really wise.
man, yeah, I can't even imagine either too, because with what you shared, Zach, you're longing for and praying for a beautiful thing
Mm-hmm.
in that. It's not like, man, they got a new boat. I want a boat.
Yeah,
You
right.
know,
I really want that
Mm-hmm.
26 footer. Yeah.
yeah, or they went to some all inclusive. I want to be able to do that on my
Yeah.
summertime off. Like you're longing for more life
Yeah.
and to
Mm-hmm.
share that life. And so that's a beautiful thing. And there's some psalms that come to mind when the psalmist is pleading with God, like,
Mm-hmm.
why do the wicked get wealthier?
Yeah.
And why do they live long? And why do they have these great parties? And here I am in my obedience, feeling like I'm lacking. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just such an honest and just genuine experience for for people who are following Jesus. Not at all to say that, you know, our friends who maybe get successful or have this happen to them are wicked by any stretch of the imagination, you know,
Yeah,
but I think
no.
there's just that natural curiosity of, okay, why is it happening for them? You know,
Mm.
even Jesus in some of his final words to Peter after he's restored him on the beach,
Mm,
you know, Peter's concerned about what's going to happen to John. And like,
yeah.
well, and Jesus is like, don't, never mind that. Like, let's
Mm.
talk about you and what's going
Mm.
to happen to you, you know? And so
Yeah.
I love your thought on identity and understanding what, or thinking about what you're rooting yourself in.
Mm,
Yeah.
And if it's not in him, then it is going to constantly fluctuate, you know,
yeah.
based on what you're seeing happen for other people. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
sometimes that's where I struggle in terms of reading the Bible too, because sometimes it feels like the Bible's kind of like boom, 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 boom. It's like, okay, like this happens and this happens and this happens, but
Mhm.
it's like the reality is like sometimes there's months, days, months, years
Yeah.
between some of those events, or even like people praying for and receiving things, and
Yeah.
it's like that patience I feel like I just don't have sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Zach, if I could ask you a bit more like on the personal side too. I'm reading Trina's comment. It's just making me think like, so you said for 5 years you were undergoing this, and now I know you and you have two beautiful kids. What, like, even speaking to what Pastor Matt wrote about in this chapter, what would you say changed within you in those 5 years as you like waited for an answer? And praise God, that answer ended up being yes, but it came with other pain too.
Yeah.
Like how did you change as a result of asking for a miracle and having to wait for it?
Hmm.
Also, I know you like to marinate. You mentioned that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I like
This
to
isn't a great
marinate.
marinating platform.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's like a couple of things there. But first I'm going to maybe share a story. And then I'm going to backtrack a little bit. And so, my short story is that I've had that experience for us while drawn out, like we prayed for and we received what we were asking for, which was beautiful. But even within that, like we lost a baby at 17 weeks, like there was a lot of pain and hardship within that.
Mm.
Um, and then I also had a friend last year commit suicide, and that was after months of me spending time with him, praying for him,
Yeah.
asking God, please, like I want you to deliver him. I
Mhm.
see such pain and challenges happening in his life, and like I just want him to be free of the challenges that he's experiencing, and like the demons that he was harboring.
Mm.
Um, and so that kind of brings me back to maybe two things that I learned over some of those seasons. But the first is like just the reliance on God's presence. I remember vividly a meeting we had with a pastor here when we were going through a lot of that, and I remember the first thing he prayed for was God's presence, and
Mm.
that has just stuck with me so much. Like I just
Mm.
feel like without God's presence, it's like, what do you have? Um,
Mm.
and so it's like, man, when I'm praying for something, that's one of the first things I really want, no matter what I'm asking for, no matter what I'm praying for, like I really want to feel and experience and to have God present with me as I'm doing that.
Mm.
Um, and then I think the second thing is that, one of the things I was sharing with Fred right before this is like, I'm kind of like a schemer. It's like, I've got my plans. I've got what I want to do. I've got, the list. I think, but oftentimes, like what God has for you is just so much greater than that.
Mm.
And setting that down and really saying, hey, God, look, like, you know what, this stuff, this is fine. This is whatever. What do you have for me?
Yeah.
And that is just so hard. And I would say those two things there's maybe the importance of those two things are kind of like what I learned.
Mm.
Man.
That's really good. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. I love that question. God, what do you have for me? I think
Mhm.
it requires a kind of maturity, a kind
Mm-hmm.
of surrender and trust. I think, I think Philip even mentioned that in the comments, but yeah, like that to me feels like a different level and a deeper sense of, yes, both God's presence, but also like whatever it is you do have for me, God, even if it's
Mm.
not what I've been asking for, I will trust you in it
Yeah.
and I will
Yeah.
follow you and I will love you. You know, I think is just that in itself becomes its own moment of transformation, I think.
Yeah.
That is just incredible,
Mm.
but man, appreciate you going there and giving us some insight into that. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
that's great. That's great. Chat too, just a reminder, if there's anything from chapter 8 that resonated with you, or questions you might have around the things that we're chatting about, we'd love to hear them. Scott sent another question. This one looks grammatically correct, so we can go ahead and read it.
Wow.
Relief.
But from the reverse perspective, how do I best be with someone who's feeling like God isn't answering their miracle, but he answered it for me? How do I be there for them without making them feel bad?
It's an interesting question, because I think it depends a lot on like where's that person at in being able to celebrate versus like maybe they're not in a place where they can. And I think I would adjust my celebration of my own miracle depending on where they're at. Like,
Yeah.
read the room basically. But I think if that person's in a healthy place where they can celebrate, then I think there's a wholehearted reason to dive in to celebrate together. But if they're in a harder place, like I might reserve some of that and choose and discern who are the best people to give a more wholehearted celebration with. And then who do I need to just hold back a little bit with and be a good listener to? I think listening is probably like what I would lean into most for someone who's still either waiting or received a no and is struggling with that, or received a yes and it's not what the kind of yes that they wanted. I think there's a million ways that could go, but I would try and discern where they're at and then adjust sort of how far I go with what I'm celebrating and the ways in which I celebrate probably accordingly.
Yeah. To that point, Morgan, there's that great proverb that talks about not foolishly just coming in singing a song of gladness and joy to a heavy heart, and then turning around saying, "Oh, I was only kidding. I'm only joking."
Wow. Yeah.
But there does require kind of discernment, and like as you said, what am I choosing to celebrate or to mention here?
Yeah.
And to reflect, like, would I have this same kind of joy had I not gotten what I was asking for from God?
Yeah.
And
Totally.
so to maybe counsel them and be a friend to them from the perspective of what God may withhold, in their situation, I think is really, really important. And I think is a better demonstration of compassion in that moment, rather than like not that anyone have like oh, look what I got kind of attitude,
Yeah.
like when you're opening up a Happy Meal and like one kid gets the better toy than the other one or something like that, but just like a genuine sense of compassion for where they're at and what they're experiencing,
Yeah.
and to know that just because you got the good news doesn't make you now the expert on how to get the same thing,
Yeah, that's a word.
which
I
is
think
sometimes the thing.
to that same end, like not pitying them either. I think most people, compassion isn't pity. And I think that we can sometimes mistake the two. And people don't want to be pitied when they're waiting for their answer or they receive one that they don't like. It's like compassion, I think, is discerning and reading the room of what do they need. And I think most of the time it's probably not pity. It's just kindness, gentleness. But yeah. Hey, I was thinking through too, in the chapter, I feel like it was maybe in the middle of the way. I don't know. Pastor Matt was talking about people that he's experienced that have this gift of healing. And I wanted to talk about that with you guys a little bit too, because like I said, I kind of grew up like in and out of the church, but when I did go, it wasn't the kind of church where there was like healings happening. Like that was not really a thing. And so when I learned about that, it kind of weirded me out at first, but now I'm definitely a believer in this spiritual gift. I think that we see evidence of that through scripture. And he talked about a couple people in his life that he believes have that. Curious what you guys, like, any thoughts on that concept, as well as do you have people in your life that that have the gift of healing? Like, yeah, throwing it to y'all.
Yeah, two thoughts. First, I think, from a biblical, like theological perspective, it's absolutely a thing that individuals pray in such a way in which I think God moves and works through them pretty powerfully. Paul alludes to it in 1 Corinthians even 13, the passage that we're actually working through now as a church in our current series. Like Paul speaks about what the Corinthians were able to pray for. Like you have the faith that can move mountains, he says, right? So like when you pray with such faith that like the impossible is made possible now, you know? And over the course of my life as a Christian, I've encountered various leaders who do have a kind of faith that like you want them to pray over you. You know, you want them to not just speak a word, but to ask of God on your behalf. I think is a powerful thing, you know. And so and I think maybe one clarifying thing is to say, because God has chosen to work through this person at a particular time, or maybe a few times, doesn't mean now that that's the gift that they essentially conjure up at any given moment, you know. But they just have a reputation, like they have now. It's built into their character. They're a person of faith, so that when you go to them and say, "Hey, would you pray for me about this?" They have that about them, you know. But it's not so much like we're finding the sage in the tribe, or like the one, like the miracle worker. Though that might be the case, I just think it's better to take, okay, in the past we've seen God work powerfully through this person, and we believe that he can do it again, you know. And so, but sometimes I think we overlap these gifts in which they happen maybe sporadically, occasionally, versus gifts that happen more on a consistent basis, whether it be like hospitality or teaching or administration, you know. And then you have these other occasional gifts that I think are unique to maybe certain church gatherings or experiences where God's Spirit moves in a powerful way.
Yeah.
And sometimes we act as if, oh, let's just go find the right person, you know. So, but yeah, sorry, that's a long answer, but yeah, short answer. There have been
so good.
Generally older people who have just powerful, just the gift of faith. I'd say it like that. So
they have an intimacy with God that makes you want to go to them.
Yeah.
I know I asked you all the question, but I'm also like reflecting on what you just said, Fredo. And I just came back from travel, and I was on a trip with my mom and sister. We were in Europe and traveling across a few different cities and places. And we did a detour one day and stopped in this city where it's believed that the water that comes from the river of this city, this is in France, has this like healing power. And so we stopped in there, and I had heard of this before. There's some like documentary on it on Netflix as well, but people literally travel to this place as though it's like a Mecca.
Wow.
And it's like a Catholic church. So there's a whole church set up. And then on the side of this church, there's this like sort of grotto situation where they're pulling pulling water from this river that's close by, and people are coming by with buckets to fill like gallons of this water. There's like little systems where you can fill it up, and it was such a strange thing. Like I didn't know what to make of it because at first I felt heavy. I'm thinking like this is so sad. Like people are coming in here and they've traveled with their family members who are physically disabled or mentally handicapped, or they're struggling in some way, shape, or form, and they're asking for a miracle. And they're coming here just thinking this water is going to do it. But then I walked over to where they were sort of like performing the ritual. And it was like a collective group of people praying for each one of them. They would go and they would have this water splashed on them. But then this big group of people would repeat this. I couldn't understand what the prayer was. It was in a different language.
Wow.
But they would say this prayer and it was in the name of Jesus. And I was like, I don't fully know what to do with this, because I feel like I'm experiencing something that I partly believe in and then partly am struggling with. Like, I'm like, it's not the water that's magical. Like it's Jesus. If he's healing these people, like it's Jesus, it's not the water. But it was such an incredible thing to witness because there were lines of people in wheelchairs. They make a lot of money off of this place, by the way. That's kind of the twisted part. But like a lot of people in wheelchairs lined up like for ages, and they're going through one at a time, and you're just watching, and you're seeing also the hope that they have, like the hope that they have that this could be their moment, you know? So I don't know where I'm necessarily going with this. I don't have a question necessarily, but it was just a very interesting experience to like observe and sit with and I don't have my own thoughts fully formed on where I'm at in it, but it made me think of what we're talking about right now. Like there's a desperation there, and I think that's a good starting place, and a belief
Yeah.
that Jesus can heal, but not necessarily magic in the water, you know?
Right. Right.
Yeah, I grew up in like probably a pretty maybe like conservative church. So it's like there weren't like a ton of miracles happening there. It wasn't super enthusiastic services or anything like that. But Fredo, how you described having someone having like a strong faith definitely resonates with me. It's like there are people out there that I'm whether close to or have had a relationship where it's like, man, if I need prayer, it's like that's who I want praying for me. Um, that definitely resonates with me in terms of what you're describing. And yeah, Morgan, that sounds like a really fascinating experience. Like in one way, it's like
Mhm.
that's in one sense, it's kind of very like powerful, like visceral. It's
Mhm.
like this whole experience, but in another, it's kind of like, man, like is it like what is actually happening here?
Yeah. Like I just want to be like, do you know? Like, do you know
Yeah,
that it's God? It's not this river. You know what I
right.
mean? Like
Right.
I
Right.
wanted to like tell everybody, obviously gotta read the room. That wasn't my moment, but it was like, yeah, definitely fascinating. And I think it does show it sort of depicts this idea of like eventually at some point in life we're all in need of
Mm,
God's movement. We're all in
yeah,
need of a miracle, and whether that's a physical one or um, a miracle of our minds or whatever that is, like I think it was just like that was embodied in seeing these lines and lines of people. Is like I'm just seeing the collective desperation for the thing that at some point we all will need,
yeah.
and like what is our process then when we need it? Where do we go? How do we go about that? And I think Pastor Matt outlines that incredibly well in this chapter of like the starting point, all the way through the willingness to surrender to what that means for us, even if that's a change in mission or a change in positioning. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so crucial too. What you just touched on, the act of surrender. Even if it maybe has the appearance of that looks a bit foolish to surrender in that way, or
Mm.
appears maybe silly in others' eyes. Like the story of what you just described, visiting this sacred place where people go to get healed by the waters, by some might be, viewed as like that's some jargon, that's pretty
Yeah.
bogus,
Yeah.
but there is, I think a part of us as humans that has to resonate with their desperation, with their
Yeah.
need, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
I think as human beings, we have always had a propensity to look to things to have
Mm.
maybe like a transcendent connection. We
Mm.
long for a touch of the divine in a lot of
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
And so there's, even in a really secular world, we still have transcendent icons. Celebrities, in a lot of ways, are transcendent
Yeah.
icons, right? Like when humans get near
T
them,
Swift.
they freak out. Yeah, like so we still have that in us, in our makeup, to kind of feel like we're in the presence of something that can change us. And even if it
Mm.
is, water, like a natural resource, but it has a history of maybe healing people, and
Yeah.
so I so as I hear you say that, as we kind of discuss what God's will is, all those things, like I think back to just the principle of, especially in my own life, to kind of resist the critical aspect of things,
Mm.
and
Mm.
embrace more of a curiosity around
Mm,
what God
Mm.
could do in those moments, and so,
Yeah.
which, yeah, to your point, I love that Matt was very practical around learning to listen to God's voice and to
Mhm.
discern what His will might be, and then coming to a place of like, yeah, surrendering to
Yeah.
being open to what He actually decides to do in that moment,
Mm.
which
Mhm.
which I think is the journey for all of us in any season, whether you are in real desperation of something or
Yeah.
it feels very ordinary. There's always an invitation to surrender, to
Mhm.
something more significant that God's at work potentially doing in our life. So, with that, I'd
Yeah.
love to just
Well
to
said.
kind of bring this to a close. But I'd love to hear what maybe have been some best practices for you guys as you seek to listen, and seek to hear God's voice.
Mm.
mm.
Zach, I think you should start.
Yeah. I think I was kind of, as I was describing earlier, like, I think for me, it's just being purposeful about creating space. Like I really like to hike. I really like to get outside. And I oftentimes like to do that alone. And sometimes I don't maybe get to do that. Like I'm in a season right now with 2 little kids that maybe I don't get to do that as much as I would like.
Mhm.
But I think being intentional, for me at least, about like how do I create space for that? How do I slow my life down? How do I put myself into a posture of listening and prayer? And man, that's for me, it's just so hard because I live my life fast. There's a bunch of things to do. There's a lot of priorities.
Yeah.
And so I've just really found the need, like it's not a want, it's a need for me to slow down and create spaces like that for myself.
Mm-hmm. I fully am with Zach on what he's sharing. I think for me, like I have to go to places where I'm not responsible for something for a second to
Or
be able
someone,
to or someone to really be able to feel like I can enter into a place where I'm fully listening. Otherwise, I struggle to be present when like life responsibilities or like I have to enter into a place where I'm a bit more where I allowed myself to tell me if this makes sense, where I'm like allowing myself to be cared for rather than being the one that's caring for someone to
Absolutely.
actually listen. Because if I'm in the place where I'm caring for someone, I'm just too I'm too obsessed with what's happening in that moment. And
Right.
I don't find the capacity to be able to listen well beyond that.
yeah,
That's
So I
great.
have to find and make those places for myself. And that can look like that could look like a lot of different like representations. That could be a walk. That could be like after I drop my kids off at school, like taking a second before I get ready for work, like, but a place where I allow myself to be the child of God rather than like the caretaker of something else, I think.
that's so good.
I like that. I like that. Man.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much. What a treat it was to be with you guys, to be back as we continue to journey through Everyday Miracle Chat. It was great to have you here with us today. We appreciate all the participation. Letty, it was good to see you. Thanks for joining us, even though you were late.
Yeah,
Greg, it was good to
Louise.
see you. Luis.
Yep.
And I think was it
Awesome.
Trisha earlier who was on as well?
Trina.
Yeah, Trina. Thank you so much, and Philip, everyone else as well. Good to participate with you guys. Next week we're back here Tuesday, 1 p.m. Pacific time, looking at chapter 9, an incredible chapter on the complexity of healing. There's going to be just some great conversations around that. So we look forward to seeing you guys. Grace and